the portion control is very odd. And then because I'm on a no meat diet, they're supposed to have either hummus or cottage cheese or tofu for you, but mostly I'd say about 95% of it's tofu if it's anything, or beans. And I'd say 95% of it's beans, and then otherwise you have like a tofu substitute. And the tofu has there's no seasoning allowed, so there's no salt or pepper or anything. So it's beyond tasteless. And then you go back to work at 12. And that lasts until 3:30 when you come back and you have a stand-up headcount at 4. And if you are lucky, they call recreation at some point during the day. If you're at work, you miss it. And if you're not, you get to go out for an hour.
All right, Mark, what do you got?
So I'm on a no-meat diet. That would be I'm a vegetarian for everybody else. But I'm on a no-meat diet. Again, is saying, like, look at me. Look how wonderful I am. I don't eat meat. But you get tofu. So again, the moment it becomes bad, it's all about you have to do this, you have to do that. The moment there's some high status in it, Scott, the moment there is some sense of moral goodness, it's all about I do this. And we'll see this throughout as we have before. We're seeing this eye rub as well, which that'll start to redden over time as well. So these adapters and pacifiers, as Scott was rightly saying, they are going to become so frequent that you'll start to see damage happening to the skin tone. And therefore, again, that's why I would put this in the class of this is probably about incarceration, because if you can cause some kind of self-harm in some way, or you be the cause of irritation or pain, it means that they're not the cause of the irritation, of the pain. You have some control over yourself. So some extreme pacifying behaviors. What's interesting as well, just the banality and the mundanity of what she's talking about here. It is utterly mundane. That's prison. Don't go there. Don't, whatever you can do to avoid that, you should be avoiding that. Greg, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, a couple of things. I always say that adapters, like Joe talks about it being comforting, I say it makes familiar the unfamiliar. So if I put you in a cage and you start doing the same thing over and over and over, it becomes familiar. Whatever that thing is, and it can be all kinds of weird things. If you've ever been around prisoners, they pick up lots of weird things. The other one is the pronoun shift, Mark. I had it in my notes as well. And I run into it all the time in corporate world. The person who is a narcissist and who has a team of people who bust their ass to get things done says I when things go well, and we when things go poorly. You see it every day in your corporate life. Those are narcissistic tendencies in people, so they want to take the credit for it. Only a couple of things really, other than that, to push here. One is her baseline kind of stabilizes at the beginning. She starts to not adapt as much. Where she is adapting is when she's describing the food, and you have to wonder why, because that should be a thing you just puke up and say, look, I eat tofu 90% of the time or me, but she doesn't. She's careful and she's navigating. She's adapting more than normal right there. I wonder if she's afraid of how that will be perceived by people that feed her. Remember, your caretakers, and Mark, you say it all the time. We defer to those who own resource. And so we see a lot of that. And I also will go back to, she's fallen from a great height. She had a ton of stuff going on in her world. She probably didn't have to adapt much. She would just be poised and quiet and do that coy thing when she was talking to normal people. But when you go to prison, to your point, Mark, everything changes. Nothing's good. When your big to-do is to talk about going to the library and eating tofu, your day is pretty mundane. Scott, what do you got?
Yeah, I agree. And I agree with you at the first there, it's kind of calm. But then when she starts talking about the food, this apparently is a big deal for her, because that's when she starts moving around. She moves around so much and squirms around so much. It's like a 1980s Times Square crack tweaker. She can't sit still. She's just moving around and just looks weird. But this is normal for a situation like that. Again, coming out of where she came from her higher status down to this lower one. And right now, this is the highest I'm sure she's felt on that level in a long time, because all the attention is on her. She knows everybody's going to be watching her. She knows there's interest in her. The reason for the interest is not good, but still she's getting that validation of attention that personality type needs. So that's another reason, going back to which we see pretty much the whole time, the grooming, the trying to look cute, because she hasn't been pretty in a long time, or what she would consider that, because she's not having anybody do her hair. Obviously, it's the longest it's ever been, the pictures I've seen of her. And I think this is a real psychological situation she hasn't been in, if she ever has been. It's a tough one for her. So I think that's why we're seeing so much movement and so many adapters, and we're seeing psychological upset. Chase, what do you got?
Yeah, so there's a lot of the same self-touching, self-soothing behavior here. We're still seeing the stress spike with these, and her blink rate's really high. And we use blink rate, which is how often you blink. The more often you blink, the more stressed you are. There's some exceptions to that, like dry eyes and things like that. But on another note, she has a problem being observed when she cannot control her appearance. We saw this in court when the court artist was sketching her and she stared them down and sketched them back. So she drew a picture of the court artist sketching her. So we know there's a problem with being observed here, and I think that's what we're seeing. One thing we can take away from this for future analysis is her eye home. And this means where she normally looks to recall truthful information. So from this video, when she's recalling places and activities, she has a very strong tendency to look at her or our 1 o'clock. So 1 o'clock, if you were looking at the clock, and this is up and to her left. This one behavior is so critical to know that if an interview ever happens in the future, you would be able to see a deviation from this during critical questions about places and activities. So keep that in mind. Where does somebody normally look to access truthful stuff that you know is most likely true? And then look for that a little bit later in the conversation.
The portion control is very odd. And then because I'm on a no meat diet, they're supposed to have either hummus or cottage cheese or tofu for you, but mostly I'd say about 95% of it's tofu, if it's anything, or beans. And I'd say 95% of it's beans, and then otherwise you have like a tofu substitute. And the tofu has there's no seasoning allowed, so there's no salt or pepper or anything. So it's beyond tasteless. And then you go back to work at 12. And that lasts until 3:30 when you come back and you have a stand-up head count at 4. And if you are lucky, they call recreation at some point during the day. If you're at work, you miss it. And if you're not, you get to go out for an hour.
If you like this video, get the full body language breakdown and analysis on our main channel by clicking this video right here.